Memphis heat hums through the curtains. The lights are so bright they slice the air into glitter. The band is cruising through the bridge. The audience is somewhere between breath and roar. Then, as if the world has misread the cue, the music hushes. All eyes snap to the stage. In the center of that impossible light stands a single man who is both ordinary and myth. Elvis Presley, in a jumpsuit that eats the spotlight, his hair combed like midnight, a halo of sweat along his temple. Imagine the scene: a child in a wheelchair near the barrier, tiny hands clenched on chrome railings, face upturned like a lighthouse searching for land. Something about that child clips Elvis's attention. Maybe a laugh that sounds like courage. Maybe a look that says, "I'm here." He does something thousands of people expect him not to do. He walks off the stage. People whisper, "He's going to talk to the kid." But Elvis does more than talk. He reaches into his hand, not for a microphone, not for a prop, but for a piece of himself he wears like a signature, an opal-and-diamond ring, a heavy, showy thing that catches the stage lights and throws them back like confetti. Witnesses say it was worth somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000 at the time, an obscene price for a ring, especially to hand over in the middle of a show. He kneels, not for a photo op, not for the cameras, not for publicity. He places the ring in the child's hand, whispers something. "For luck," some say. "Keep this," others recall, then returns to the stage. For a beat, the band freezes. The audience exhales as one organism, and the music resumes with a new texture, gratitude braided into the notes. There are no official photos of that exact moment, no slick paparazzi shots sold to tabloids. What survives are people's memories, faded but vivid. The glitter of the ring, the hush, the tiny hand holding something that looks like a crown. In the years that follow, the story takes on the electricity of myth. Fans retell it at bar stools. Biographers tuck it into chapters about the man behind the stage persona. But what made that instant more than an anecdote? Why did Elvis, a king of excess, decide in a single impulse to give away what was, by his collection's standards, an extravagant object? This opening moment matters because it reframes the way we think about celebrity generosity. In an era before image managers and crafted humanitarian moments, Elvis's act is raw, spontaneous, risky, intimate. A man who lived surrounded by diamonds and adulation chooses a single private exchange over spectacle. The ring becomes a hinge. On one side, the glittering apparatus of fame. On the other, the fragile human need that fame can sometimes meet. So we start here. Under those lights, in that hush, where thousands came for a performance, and one child left with a memory that would outlast the decades. The drama isn't just the money, it's the symbolic reversal, power lowered to gentle hands, star status absolved for a moment into simple human kinship. The rest of this story traces that reversal, who Elvis was beneath the rhinestones, what that ring meant to him and to the child, and why an act like that still makes us hold our breath. People prefer legends tidy, the chart-topping icon, the jumpsuited god, the man whose signature is a gold TCB bolt. But real people are messier, Elvis included. Behind the stagecraft and the paparazzi, he was a constellation of contradictions, public spectacle and private longing, ostentatious spender and impulsive giver, wounded child and magnified magnate. To understand why he gave that ring away, you have to look at his habitus, how he used objects, especially jewelry, as language. Elvis grew up in Tupelo, Mississippi. Scarcity was his first teacher. He learned quickly to equate material abundance with security and affection, to translate love into objects when words weren't available. But as his fortune ballooned, his giving didn't stop. If anything, it intensified. Cars, homes, jewelry. He gave them away with a frequency that baffled accountants and amused friends. He famously bought a Cadillac for a stranger and handed large sums to crew members who'd never asked for anything. These weren't always calibrated PR moves. Often they were spontaneous eruptions of impulse, an empathy response that cut through logic. Jewelry, in Elvis's hands, performed a double role. It was stagecraft. Big rings flashed at audience photographers, an extension of the jumpsuit's noise, but also a personal emblem. The TCB ring, the taking care of business bolt, was less a status symbol than a talisman. He'd wear it like an identity badge and, just as often, remove it like an offering. When he slipped a ring off mid-song and handed it into a crowd, he was sending a message more complicated than charity. He was making human contact. Those closest to him remember a man who hated the distance fame imposed. In private, he surrounded himself with simple pleasures, friends, peanut butter sandwiches, old gospel records, and he hated the idea that wealth should isolate him from the commonality of pain. Giving things away let him bridge that gap. Anecdotes swirl. Elvis buying groceries for strangers, leaving fat tips in diners, paying medical bills without fanfare. Once, when asked why he was so generous, a friend claims Elvis shrugged and said, "It feels right." There's also the shadow side. Fame brings guilt and a peculiar kind of performance pressure. Biographers note how Elvis's generosity sometimes seemed like a penance, an attempt to atone for the strangeness of his life, for doors slammed shut in childhood, for mothers he could not save from worry with money alone. Wealth became an available resource for emotional repair, and giving, public or private, was his tool. But crucially, the ring-on-stage moment was not entirely performative. It lacked premeditation. That's what separates it from a publicity stunt. Elvis's pattern shows a man who would buy a ring for private reasons and then, in the thick of a performance, decide that the ring's highest function was to be given rather than worn. He turned a mass event into a private exchange, folding intimacy into spectacle. The ring, then, is both a prop and a sacrament, a small relic he used to consecrate human connection. So when we ask who Elvis was behind the crown, the answer resists neatness. He was extravagance and tenderness at once, a man for whom jewelry could be both armor and offering. In the mid-century American carnivalesque of Las Vegas, he stood as a paradox, a celebrity who gave away pieces of his identity to repair the fragile edges of other people's lives. That pattern helps explain why the $40,000 ring made sense to him, not because he didn't value it, but because he valued the moment of seeing someone else's life change even more. Rings can hold stories. This one, opal set in diamond, heavy and audacious under stage lights, was more than a jewel. It was a statement. Elvis's taste in jewelry was theatrical by design: large stones, flamboyant settings, pieces crafted to be visible from the nosebleeds. But that visibility carried meaning. On stage, rings read as part of the costume. Off stage, they read as tokens of self, heirlooms, and investments. The opal and diamond ring in question had the kind of presence that announces itself. Opal is a mischievous stone. At once smoky and bright, it swallows light only to spit it back as a constellation. Coupled with diamonds, it becomes a mirror of showbiz, sparkle inside shadow. Valuation in the 1970s priced such bespoke pieces in the tens of thousands. For Elvis, whose collection could rival small treasuries, this might have been one among many, but it was also chosen for display, visible on a gloved hand or mid-gesture, meaning the act of removing it carried theatrical and emotional weight. His jeweler, who engineered many of Elvis's distinctive pieces, would often make duplicates because Elvis lost things, because he liked to gift, and because a replica keeps the image intact even when the original is gone. That detail matters. Giving a ring away didn't always mean the public persona would be unrecognizable, but sometimes he gave originals, objects with history, with dented edges and private associations. The act of giving an original is riskier. It exposes a personal artifact to the unknown. Materially, a ring like this is heavy. It sits on the hand and alters its gesture. Symbolically, it's heavier still. Inheritance, status, identity. When Elvis passed that weight into a child's palm, the exchange recalibrated what the ring signified. No longer merely a piece of spectacle, it became a talisman, the sort of object you rub for luck, tuck into a memory box, or pawn in a desperate hour. There's folklore attached to that ring. Rumors that it was a family heirloom. Whispers that Elvis had insisted the opal was a sign of protection. Others claimed the ring was an impulsive purchase, fresh from a jeweler's counter. Which is true? The record is fuzzy, partly because Elvis's relationship with objects was so intimate that he rarely let their stories be catalogued cleanly. Whether heirloom or new, the ring's value is twofold: market price and emotional currency. And what about after? A ring leaves ripples. If it was sold, it financed something: medical bills, therapy, hospital visits. If it stayed in the family, it became a private relic, a treasured link to an impossible night. The absence of public auction records muddies the trail. That absence is telling. Some gifts are protected by discretion. The ring's afterlife, whether tucked into a drawer or traded in a moment of need, only amplifies the magnitude of Elvis's choice. He didn't give a trinket. He gave an object large enough to alter a life's narrative. Finally, imagine the theater of it. The ring's bright face catching the house lights as it passes from hand to hand, the crowd's collective gasp, and the new quiet world that opens for a child clutching an improbable fortune. The ring, in that instant, moves from being a symbol of the king's identity to a mirror reflecting someone else's worth back at them. That shift, more than dollars, defines the gift. The person who received the ring is, to this day, the smallest, most potent mystery in the story. Different tellings call the fan a boy, a girl, a young adult. Some say family members insisted on privacy. Others suggest the child's identity was shielded by grateful parents. What remains constant is the image: a child in a wheelchair, eyes fixed upward, hands trembling around something that will change the texture of their world. For that child, the ring could have been an emblem of recognition, a proof that, in a world often built for the able-bodied, someone had paused. Recognition is a form of dignity. Sometimes the mere act of being seen matters more than the object itself. Imagine, for a child who may have spent many afternoons looking out hospital windows and missing schoolyard games, to suddenly be the center of a crowd's attention, to have the king literally bow into that orbit. The emotional return on that spotlight is incalculable. What happened afterward splits into competing narratives. One story says the family held the ring like scripture, passing it down as a talisman. Another says they sold it quietly to cover the crushing cost of medical care. That latter possibility is not cruel to imagine. Medical expenses were and remain a frequent, unromantic reason people part with heirlooms. If the ring funded a surgery, a hospital stay, or long-term therapy, its value translates directly into life and survival. If the ring stayed, its value translated into legacy and story, something to hold when grief or isolation felt near. No public record confirms either path. There are no auction logs that point to a famous sale tied to that Las Vegas night. That absence nourishes the myth. Perhaps the family guarded the memory the way other families guard private miracles. Perhaps the ring was traded and no one spoke of it again. But the most important truth is simpler. Whatever the ring's fate, the child left that venue holding, if only for a moment, the definitive answer to a question every fan asks: Was I seen? In that heart-quickening confirmation lies the real gift. People around the scene recall the aftermath. Ushers who claimed the child walked away lighter, as if gravity had loosened. Band members who remembered a different tone in the encore, less swagger, more softness. Fans in the crowd kept talking for years about the hush that fell, a hush that sounded less like silence than like reverence. If the ring ever entered private hands again, it carried a story no gem certificate could record. If it remained with the family, it carried witness. Either way, the exchange seeded a ripple. A person who'd been given something extraordinary could thereafter view themselves as worthy of extraordinary things. That intangible shift, self-worth reflected back by an idol's gesture, can alter life choices, open possibilities, and seed resilience. Sometimes the smallest human episodes, an unexpected kindness, a whisper of attention, reshape a life more than any material wealth can. Elvis handed down a jewel, but perhaps what he most fundamentally gave was visibility, the child's existence affirmed on a stage that otherwise spotlighted fame and distance. That affirmation is why people tell the story still, not as gossip about a ring, but as evidence that even the most gilded lives can be, at key moments, simply human. When we hunt for motive, we often demand a clean explanation. People want causes that fit a formula, PR strategy, personal penance, religious impulse. Elvis's generosity resists tidy labels. The truth is a braid of reasons: empathy, performative identity, guilt, habit, and the human need to connect. First, empathy. Multiple accounts from people around Elvis describe him as unusually tuned to vulnerability. He noticed small things, a trembling in a hand, a whisper of loneliness, and responded in manners that jarred the choreography of celebrity. Empathy is not always rational. Often it is reflexive. For Elvis, the sight of a child in need may have triggered the same instinct that later saw him buying groceries for strangers. The ring, in this light, was an embodied answer, a material fix to an emotional recognition. Second, ritual and identity. Elvis performed generosity as part of his personal lexicon. The TCB insignia, the distributed rings, the habit of tipping extravagantly, all became part of how he defined himself. Giving was not only a reaction to need, it was a way to rehearse selfhood. In the absence of an ordinary private life, giving allowed him to simulate intimacy. Passing an object into someone else's control stitched him into a private story and gave him a sense of agency over a world otherwise consumed by public demand. Third, guilt and atonement. Wealth can produce an odd moral arithmetic. For someone raised in poverty, abundance can be a source of both joy and disquiet. Giving becomes a means to correct an imbalance, a way to quiet conscience. Several biographers speculate that Elvis's largesse functioned as practical contrition. Whether or not that's fair, the pattern is clear. He spent money on others often enough that one begins to sense an emotional ledger at work. Fourth, spontaneity and showmanship. Elvis loved a good moment. He was theatrical to his bone. A public act of giving could be both a private mercy and a piece of performance art. But the key difference with the ring moment is its ontological character. It wasn't rehearsed. The impact came from its unpredictability. In giving suddenly, Elvis dissolved the spectator-performer barrier and created something vulnerable and real. Finally, the reciprocity of meaning. When Elvis gave a ring away, he received something equally valuable in return, a restored sense of humanity. The applause, the tears, the hush, these were forms of reciprocal validation that deferred the cost of the object. In other words, his gift rebalanced him socially and emotionally. For a figure whose life was lived in the glare, that private recalibration may have mattered more than the ring itself. So when someone asks, why did Elvis do it? The best answer is that he did what many people do when they're trying to figure themselves out in public. He used what he had to make contact. The ring was a shortcut, an object that could translate wealth into witness. For Elvis, who often felt his interior life misunderstood, handing over a ring was a way to make an immediate, unambiguous statement. You are seen, and you matter. That mixture, impulse wrapped in identity, guilt braided with empathy, explains how a single action can be both intimate and legendary. It's what makes the story persist. It's human in all the ways we like to believe celebrities can be when the curtain falls. Stories are a kind of currency, and the Elvis ring story has turned into a small economy of meaning. Whether the ring sits in a private drawer, funded a surgery, or was melted into other jewels, its provenance matters less now than the tale itself. How it gets told, retold, and repurposed across generations. The ring's afterlife is a lesson in legacy. Objects change hands, but stories travel. The public remembers Elvis for music, for flamboyance, for a career that reshaped pop culture. But cultural memory also keeps the quieter flashes, moments of generosity that complicate the caricature. Those flashes are durable, they humanize. They invite us to imagine a star performing empathy in real time. That's why the ring anecdote is repeated in documentaries, whispered at Graceland tours, and embroidered into Elvis lore. Cultural institutions amplify these moments. Exhibits at Graceland and biographies cite Elvis's habit of giving away jewelry as emblematic of his character. The story functions as a counterbalance to darker narratives about addiction and isolation. It's not a whitewash. Elvis's life was messy, but it's a different shade, a reminder that splendor and tenderness can coexist. The ring's rumored auction value, or lack thereof, also shapes the myth. Fans point to the 8-figure sale of certain Elvis memorabilia and ask what it would mean if this particular ring surfaced. Would the ring's monetary value eclipse the anecdote? Would a sale be an erasure or a financial necessity? Each possible fate reframes the narrative about value. Is the point the object or the gesture? There's another vector of legacy, the ripple effect of kindness. Accounts from long-time Elvis fans claim his generosity inspired others to give. If one child's life was eased, and that easing nudged a family toward hope, then the act multiplies. Storytelling amplifies that multiplication. In the decades since, people cite Elvis's gesture when they speak about celebrity responsibility and the potential for star power to meet human needs in small, transformative ways. Finally, the ring persists as a symbol because it encapsulates a paradox. Immense wealth used to make an intimate humanist exchange. The king, who could have hoarded every bauble, chose, at least in that instant, to trade material glitter for a deeper currency, recognition. That choice is what keeps the anecdote alive as a model for what celebrity could be, if the human impulse to give is allowed to be genuinely generous rather than performatively polished. Rings tarnish, gems lose luster, and auction catalogues grow. What endures from the story of Elvis and the $40,000 ring isn't the appraised worth, but the tensile human moment it carried. A famous man paused mid-performance and decided a child needed to be noticed more than he needed one more ornament. In the ledger of cultural acts, that instant converts to something very old and very large. The idea that value is not intrinsic to an object, but created by the meanings we attach to it. Elvis's ring became a vessel for recognition, a transfer of dignity, a simple mechanics of "I see you." For the child in the wheelchair, that recognition might have been life-affirming. For the thousands who witnessed it, it became a lesson. Wealth can be weaponized or worshipped, but it can also be used to make someone feel seen. We tell this story because we want to believe celebrities can still be human, and because the story offers a model, imperfect and complicated, of how power might be used differently. Elvis's life contained darkness and contradiction, but in giving that ring he created a flash of pure, unscripted tenderness. That flash is what makes the tale stick. So when someone asks, what was the king's real crown jewel? The answer is not a diamond or a stage costume. It's those moments when the bright man on stage steps out of the light to repair a small human breach, teaching us that the truest currency is the simple act of making someone else's world lighter. As the curtain falls in our imagination, think of the child's hand closing around the ring. Think of a man returning to the stage a little less shielded. Think of a crowd transporting that exchange into memory. That memory travels. It seeds other kindnesses. It becomes perhaps the most valuable legacy Elvis ever gave. Not a single ring, but the idea that one small act, done without fanfare, can outshine a lifetime of spectacle.